The alarm blared through the crystalline corridors of the Eternal Citadel with a frequency unheard for centuries. Prime Mediator Lyra Thine interrupted her morning meditation, her 3 vertical pupils contracting in response to the sudden glare of the alert panels. 46 years serving the Coalition Council had taught her that nothing good was ever preceded by that specific tone of urgency. The primitive radio message had traveled 49 light-years across the interstellar void, a bottle cast into the cosmic ocean by a civilization that had barely mastered nuclear fusion when they transmitted it. The signal carried greetings in 55 different languages, accompanied by mathematical diagrams, music samples, and images of a small blue planet orbiting a common yellow star. Lyrathine touched the holographic panel with her long, translucent fingers, and the message materialized before her. The voices were strange, full of harsh inflections and vowels that her universal translator needed 3 attempts to interpret correctly. The beings who had sent it called themselves humans. Humans. The word sounded almost childish in its simplicity. She summoned the complete file and spent the next 6 hours absorbing every fragment of information. What she saw left her profoundly disturbed. This species had jumped from caves to rocket technology in a mere 10,000 years, a blink of an eye in galactic terms. Their technological progression was so accelerated that it defied all known models of civilizational development. But it wasn't the speed that bothered her. It was the contradictory nature of these beings. The images showed sublime art. Temples dedicated to knowledge, acts of compassion that crossed species barriers. Yet interspersed among these wonders were records of endless wars. They killed each other over patches of land, over resources, over differences in their belief systems. They had developed weapons capable of sterilizing their own world and had actually used them against themselves. How could a species be simultaneously so brilliant and so destructive? Elder Councilor Vexcora, a crystalline being from Sigma Draconis, whose lifespan extended nearly 1,000 years, materialized in the chamber via quantum projection. His voice resonated like delicately struck crystals. "Have you reviewed the biological data, Prime Mediator?" he asked, his internal facets pulsing in shades of worried amber. "Yes, Elder. They are fragile, beyond comprehension. Life expectancy of less than 100 local solar cycles. Sensory perception limited to a narrow fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. Brittle bone structure, metabolism dependent on constant cellular combustion. And yet," Vexcora completed, "they have mastered their planet and reached for the stars." "The psychological analysis?" Lyrathine hesitated. "Problematic, Elder. They possess something our xenopsychologists are calling a hyperactive survival impulse. When confronted with existential threats, their response is not rational calculation, but a combination of adaptive aggression and irrational resilience. They simply refuse to give up." The council was called into emergency session. Representatives from 42 member species of the Coalition materialized in the Grand Hall, their forms ranging from gaseous entities to beings of pure condensed energy. The Coalition had maintained galactic peace for 11,300 years, integrating civilizations with diplomatic patience cultivated over millennia. The debate was heated. "They are violent primitives," declared the delegation from Andromeda Proxima, amphibious beings whose pacifism was legendary. "Their own transmission admits to genocides. We must isolate them until they mature or become extinct. Their potential is undeniable, countered a gaseous representative from the Carina Nebula. 10,000 years from caves to nuclear fission. Imagine what they could achieve with our guidance. Lyrathine waited for the appropriate moment before raising her crystalline voice. Members of the Council, I propose we consider not only what they are, but what they represent. For the first time in 3 centuries, a species has achieved interstellar communication without our intervention. Ignoring them would set a dangerous precedent. You suggest integration? Vexcora questioned, his facets pulsing in interrogative tones. I suggest initial diplomatic observation. We will dispatch the first contact fleet, 12 ships, standard welcome protocols. If they demonstrate capacity for civilized dialogue, we will proceed. If not, we will establish orbital quarantine until they evolve. The vote took 4 hours. By a narrow margin of 62%, the Council approved the contact mission. 12 ships were prepared at the Kepler 442 orbital shipyard, each measured 800 meters in length, constructed of white titanium palladium alloy that reflected starlight like cosmic pearls. They carried no weapons, only defensive shields and advanced translation technology. They were walking symbols of the Coalition's philosophy: beauty and diplomacy over brute force. Lyrathine took command of the flagship, the Eternal Serenity. Her crew of 240 beings from 12 different species represented the best of galactic diversity. Linguists, xenobiologists, cultural diplomats, all chosen for their skills in building bridges between the known and the alien. Before departure, she revisited the Data One last time. There was something in the eyes of the humans in the images, an intensity that the primitive imaging technology barely captured. They looked at the cameras with a mixture of hope and defiance, as if simultaneously saying, "We are part of something bigger, and we are ready for whatever comes." The fleet activated its warp drives, tearing temporary holes in the fabric of reality. The journey to the solar system would take 3 weeks in the crew's subjective time, although external observers would see only a flash of distorted light. During the journey, Lyrathine conducted cultural preparation sessions that proved simultaneously fascinating and disturbing. The team studied human languages with their illogical complexities and abundant exceptions, their artistic expressions that range from sublime to brutal, their social systems fragmented into hundreds of nation-states that competed and cooperated in unpredictable cycles. The more they learned, the more complex and contradictory the picture became. These beings had created symphonies of mathematical complexity that made sentient crystals resonate in involuntary, empathetic harmony. Paintings that captured emotions with a precision that the Coalition's emotional analysis technology took hours to decipher. Poetry that crossed species barriers and touched something universal. But they had also designed chemical weapons capable of killing millions in prolonged agony, nuclear devices that could sterilize continents, and most disturbingly, they had used these weapons against their own kind repeatedly throughout their history. One of the xenobiologists, a fungal entity from Proxima Centauri, voiced the confusion they all felt. How does the same species create so much beauty and so much horror? It's as if they are 2 different civilizations occupying the same bodies. Prime Mediator, called Kyle, her communications officer, an energetic entity from Deneb who vibrated with thoughtful tones. I have a theory about the human dichotomy. I'm listening. What if it's not a dichotomy? What if the same driving force that leads them to war also propels them to greatness? Their survival impulse doesn't distinguish between physical threats and intellectual challenges. They apply the same intensity to both. Lyrathine pondered this. It made a disturbing kind of sense. Are you suggesting that their violence and their creativity are two sides of the same coin? Exactly. They don't know how to quit, whether in war or in art. It is simultaneously their greatest strength and their curse. When they emerged from warp at the edge of the solar system, the sensors immediately began cataloging signs of civilization. Satellites orbiting the third planet, radio and television transmissions leaking into space, even a small, primitive space station rotating in low orbit. Lyrathine authorized the transmission of a greeting on all known human frequencies. Citizens of Earth, we are the Galactic Coalition, a union of species dedicated to peace and mutual progress. We received your message with joy. We come in friendship to welcome you to the family of the stars. We await your contact. And then they waited. Days turned into weeks. No response came. Sensors detected frantic activity on the planet below, encrypted transmissions jumping between military installations, but no communication directed at the fleet. Why aren't they answering? Murmured Kyle, his energetic form flickering with anxiety. Lyrathine watched the small blue planet through the viewports. Perhaps they are afraid. Or perhaps, she paused, a strange sensation running through her consciousness, they are preparing. It was on the 93rd day of waiting that the sensors screamed a different alert. Something was coming. Something big. Emerging from behind Earth's moon, accelerating with propulsion that the Coalition computers could barely categorize, a ship unlike any Lyrathine had ever witnessed cut through the void toward the fleet. It was not white. It was not beautiful. It was not a symbol of peace. It was black as the vacuum between the stars, angular and brutal in its design, with 2 kilometers of armored hull and energy pulsing through systems that made every alarm on the Eternal Serenity trigger simultaneously. The name was etched on its hull in characters that the translator took long seconds to process: Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods to give to humanity. The symbolic message could not have been clearer. Prime Mediator, Kyle's voice was laced with something she rarely heard from him: genuine fear. Energy sensors are registering absurd levels. That ship carries enough armament to vitrify a small continent. Lyrathine forced herself to remain calm, although every survival instinct in her body was screaming to retreat. Maintain position. Transmit our peaceful intentions again. Mediator, with all due respect. Vexcora intervened via the quantum link, his voice now devoid of its usual crystalline serenity. Perhaps we should consider a strategic retreat. That ship is not a diplomatic gesture. She watched the Prometheus approach with calculated speed, neither so fast that it seemed like an attack, nor so slow that it demonstrated hesitation. Whoever was commanding that war machine perfectly understood the language of projected force. No, Lyrathine replied firmly. We came to make contact. Retreating now would be admitting that our diplomacy only works when there is no risk involved. If the humans want to show their strength, let them, but we will not abandon our mission. The Prometheus slowed down 500,000 kilometers from the fleet, a distance that in spatial terms was practically nothing. For long minutes that felt like eternities, the two formations simply observed each other, predator and prey still, deciding who was which. Then finally, a transmission cut the silence. It was a human voice, female, speaking in one of the terrestrial languages the translator identified as English. The tone was cold, professional, devoid of any emotional warmth. Galactic Coalition Fleet, this is Commander Sarah Mitchell of the Earth Unified Expeditionary Force. Welcome to our system. I apologize for the delay in responding. We were busy preparing for this conversation. The humans had finally answered. The conference room aboard the Prometheus was a declaration of intent. While Coalition diplomatic chambers were designed for universal comfort, with adjustable atmospheres and soft lighting, this space was brutally functional. Grey metal walls, cold LED lighting, and a stainless steel table that reflected the lights like a sharp blade. Lyra Thine felt the weight of Earth's gravity as soon as the sealed transport deposited her in the human ship's hangar. A full G. Atmospheric pressure, denser than the Coalition standard, and a temperature that bordered on uncomfortable for her metabolism. The humans had made no adjustments to accommodate her alien physiology. Another message, she thought, as she followed the human military escort through the narrow corridors. You are on our turf now. Commander Sarah Mitchell waited in the room, standing beside the table, hands clasped behind her back in impeccable military posture. She was a woman of perhaps 40 terrestrial years, dark hair pulled back in a military bun, brown eyes that showed no surprise or admiration at seeing an alien being for the first time. Only cold, calculated assessment. Prime Mediator Lyra Thine, Mitchell said in English, waiting for the universal translator to process before continuing. Thank you for accepting our invitation aboard. I know the environmental conditions are not ideal for your physiology. Unfortunately, we did not have time to prepare more suitable accommodations. A polite lie, Lyra Thane realized. They had had 3 months since the fleet's arrival. Enough time to build appropriate environmental chambers if they had wanted to. This was a test. I am adequately comfortable, Commander, Lyra Thine replied, deciding not to show weakness. I appreciate the opportunity for face-to-face dialogue, although I must confess surprise at the form of your reception. We expected a diplomatic delegation, not a warship. Mitchell gestured for them to sit. Lyra Thine settled into a chair, clearly designed for human anatomy, while the commander remained standing for a few more seconds before finally taking a seat. This is a warship, Mitchell agreed bluntly, as are the other two positioned in stationary orbit over our main population centers. Forgive my frankness, Mediator, but diplomacy without the force to back it up is just bar talk. The statement was so direct that even the universal translator's language patterns hesitated, searching for appropriate cultural equivalents. Lyra Thine felt her pupils contract in instinctive response. Your coalition, Mitchell continued, touching a panel embedded in the table, has existed for 11,300 years. Impressive. 42 member species, thousands of worlds under coordinated governance, peace maintained through diplomacy and trade. Holograms sprang up over the table, showing detailed galactic maps that made Lyra Thine's metaphorical heart sink. The humans had not just received the Coalition's message, they had intercepted, decrypted, and analyzed decades of interstellar communications. You have been observing us, Lyra Thine stated, not as an accusation, but as an acknowledgement of fact. Since our first probe reached the limits of the solar system and picked up your sub-ether transmissions 17 years ago, Mitchell confirmed. We learned your languages, your protocols, your history. We know about the Great Andromeda War, resolved through 3 centuries of negotiations. We know about the Sigma Peace, accords which took 200 years to ratify. The commander paused, her eyes fixed on Lyra Thynes with an intensity that was almost predatory. And we know that in the last 2 centuries, your coalition has been losing territory on the galactic rim. Mining colonies sacked, trade routes disrupted, entire populations displaced by forces you classify as non-civilized existential threats. And do you know what your standard response is? Lyra Thyne did not answer. She knew what was coming next. Strategic evacuation, orbital quarantine, formal notes of condemnation, economic sanctions against aggressors who don't even participate in your trade system. Mitchell leaned forward. Mediator, with all respect to your millennia-old civilization, you are dying. Slowly, but dying. And do you know why? Enlighten me, Lyra Thyne replied, keeping her voice neutral, despite the rising anger. Because you forgot how to fight. 11,000 years of peace have made you so averse to conflict that you prefer to abandon your own citizens than to raise arms in defense. You built a beautiful, fragile civilization, like a glass castle that crumbles at the first strong wind. And humans are that strong wind, Lyra Thyne countered, allowing a hint of steel into her voice. Your species has barely achieved warp capability. You still resolve territorial disputes with violence. Your own original transmission admits to genocides in your recent history. Exactly, Mitchell responded, without hesitation or shame. We are violent. We are aggressive. We have deep flaws in our nature. But do you know what else we are? Survivors. We don't retreat. We don't negotiate with predators. When something threatens what we value, we destroy it, or die trying. She activated another hologram, this one showing disturbing images of human conflicts throughout the centuries. But contrary to what Lyra Thyne expected, Mitchell did not try to justify or minimize them. Look at this, Mediator. Our history is stained with blood. We killed each other over trivial differences. We developed weapons capable of exterminating our own species. And do you know what that taught us? That peace is not natural. Peace is a conscious choice we make every day, knowing exactly how destructive we can be if we choose otherwise. A dangerous philosophy, Lyra Thyne observed, feeling a growing discomfort with the commander's brutal honesty. Perhaps, Mitchell agreed, leaning back in her chair. But tell me, Mediator, what is more dangerous? A species that knows its own capacity for violence and consciously controls it, or a species that has convinced itself that violence doesn't exist because it never had to face it? The question hung in the air like a sharp blade. Lyra Thyne wanted to argue, wanted to defend the Coalition's 11,000 years of peace. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, she knew there was truth in Mitchell's observation. You don't understand, Lyra Thyne finally replied. The Coalition built something precious, a civilization where disputes are resolved through words, not weapons, where different species coexist in harmony. That is not weakness, it is evolution. I completely agree, Mitchell surprised her by saying. And it is beautiful, genuinely admirable. But evolution doesn't mean forgetting the lessons of the past, it means learning from them. Your coalition evolved beyond violence, but in the process, it also evolved beyond the capacity to defend itself. Mitchell turned off the holograms. When we received your welcome message, our first reaction was not joy or fear. It was caution. We analyzed your behavior patterns, your responses to threats, your power structure, and we came to a conclusion, which is that if we accepted your invitation without a show of force, we would be seen as weak, defenseless primitives to be integrated and civilized, perhaps treated with benevolent condescension, like children entering an adult world. Lyrathine could not entirely deny the accusation. That was exactly how many on the council viewed humans. "So you built a warship?" she said slowly. "Not to threaten us, but to force us to respect you." "3 ships," Mitchell corrected. "The Prometheus, the Ares, and the Valkyrie. Each capable of engaging any military vessel in your records. Not because we want war, Mediator, but because we want it to be absolutely clear that we are not potential victims." A tense silence filled the room. Lyrathine processed the implications. Humans were not simply a young, aggressive species. They were calculated strategists who understood the language of power better than civilizations with thousands of years of advantage. "So what is your proposal?" Lyrathine finally asked. "You challenged us to come here. You demonstrated your strength. What exactly do you want from the Coalition?" Mitchell smiled for the first time, but it was not a warm expression. "We want a seat at the table, not as junior members or a civilization in the process of integration, as full partners. And in return," she paused significantly, "we offer something your coalition lost millennia ago." "What?" "The willingness to bleed for strangers." Before Lyrathine could respond, a sharp alarm cut the air. A human officer burst into the room without ceremony, her face pale. "Commander Mitchell, we have received a distress call. Kepler 186F mining colony. Attack in progress. Massive casualties reported. The Coalition is transmitting petitions for emergency intervention." Lyrathine felt her blood run cold. Kepler 186F was a rare metals mining colony, home to 4,000 souls of 6 different species. And according to standard protocols, it would take weeks for the Council to authorize a military response. Mitchell looked at Lyrathine, and in that moment, the Mediator saw something in the human commander's eyes that was simultaneously terrifying and strangely comforting. "Mediator," Mitchell said, standing up, "you're about to witness exactly what it means when humans decide something will not be tolerated." She touched her communicator. "Ares, Valkyrie, this is Prometheus. Plot course for Kepler 186F, maximum warp speed. Weapons free, full authorization for hostile engagement. Let's show these raiders why invading protected territories is a fatal mistake." "Commander," Lyrathine protested, standing up as well. "You have no authority. Kepler 186F is under Coalition jurisdiction. Any military action requires Council approval." Mitchell turned to face her, and there was something primal in her expression. "Mediator, with all due respect to your bureaucracy, people are dying now, not in weeks, not in days. Now. And while your council votes and debates and drafts resolutions, we are going to do what humans do best, which is protect those who cannot protect themselves, even if it means breaking your precious rules." The Prometheus roared to life, its warp engines tearing the fabric of space-time with controlled violence. And Lyrathine realized, with a mixture of terror and hope, that the galaxy had just changed forever. The warp jump lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes in the Prometheus's subjective time. For Lyrathine, every second was an eternity of uncertainty. She remained on the command bridge at Mitchell's cold invitation, watching the humans work with efficiency that bordered on rehearsed. There was no panic, there was no indecision, just silent coordination among crew members who had clearly trained for real combat situations. "Emerging in 3, 2, 1, announced the navigator, a young man with a focused expression. The fabric of space-time tore, and the Prometheus materialized 300,000 kilometers from Kepler 186f. The sensors immediately began painting a devastating picture on the central tactical hologram. The mining colony was an orbital complex of 18 connected platforms, orbiting a rocky planet rich in iridium and osmium. Or at least it had been. Now, 6 of the platforms were completely dark, their hulls breached to the vacuum. Debris floated in decaying orbit, and Lyrathine could see with growing horror that some of that debris was bodies. 18 enemy ships surrounded the surviving platforms like marine predators, circling wounded prey. They were not ships of any civilization, recognized by the Coalition, just improvised hulls, armed with fragmentation torpedoes and industrial cutting beams modified for military use. Raiders, pirates, opportunists who attacked weak targets on the unpatrolled edges of the galaxy. "Situation?" Mitchell ordered, her voice remaining neutral despite the carnage they observed. 18 hostiles confirmed, reported the sensor officer. Low-tech configuration, but heavy armament. 12 remaining platforms are under defensive shields, but failing. Estimated time until total collapse? 23 minutes. We detect approximately 2,400 life signs on the platforms, out of the original 4,000. 1,600 dead in less than 2 hours. "Ares and Valkyrie?" Mitchell asked. "Emerging at our position in 60 seconds. "Good. Transmit to the hostiles. They have 10 seconds to deactivate weapons and surrender. After that, they will be considered hostile targets and eliminated." The communications officer blinked, surprised. "Commander, they are 18 ships. We are 3. Mitchell turned to face him, and her expression was as cold as the surrounding vacuum. "I can count, Lieutenant. Transmit." The message was sent on open band. The Raiders' response was a salvo of fragmentation torpedoes directed straight at the Prometheus. "Attack confirmed," declared the tactical officer. "Shields at 97%, minimal damage." "Weapons free," Mitchell ordered, calmly. "Disproportionate response doctrine. I want no survivors capable of sharing tactical experience." Lyrathine felt a chill run down her spine. She had witnessed naval combat before, occasionally when diplomatic situations collapsed irreversibly, but that always involved complex protocols, formal warnings, attempts to minimize casualties, even among aggressors. The humans followed none of those protocols. The Prometheus accelerated directly into the enemy formation, not in defensive evasive patterns, but in a straight line, like a spear being thrown. Plasma torpedoes emerged from its launch tubes, but not in calculated salvos, in a continuous torrent. "Impact on 3 hostiles," the tactical officer reported. "Their shields collapsed, hulls breached, targets neutralized. 3 pirate ships simply ceased to exist, vaporized by concentrated energy that exceeded their defensive capabilities by orders of magnitude. Ares reports elimination of 2 hostiles," the officer continued. "Valkyrie confirms 4 targets neutralized." In less than 90 seconds, half the pirate fleet had been obliterated. What remained of the raiders finally understood the situation. They turned their ships to flee, abandoning any pretense of organized looting or combat. It was pure survival instinct. "Don't let them escape," Mitchell ordered. "I want a message sent to every other predator in this sector. Attacking civilian targets has terminal consequences." The 3 human ships split up, each pursuing groups of fugitives with surgical precision. Lyra watched, fascinated and horrified, as the Prometheus executed maneuvers that defied her understanding of inertial physics. "How?" she murmured, more to herself than to anyone. "How are they turning like that without tearing the crew apart?" A young human engineer near her heard and replied with casual pride. "4th-generation inertial dampeners, Mediator. Our scientists developed them based on theory we found in one of the Coalition's academic transmissions. You published the math 200 years ago, but apparently never tried to build functional prototypes." They didn't just observe, Lyra realized with a sudden shock. They learned. They took theoretical Coalition knowledge and turned it into applied technology in less than 2 decades. 11 minutes after the engagement began, the last raider was neutralized. None of the 3 human ships had suffered significant structural damage. "Platform status," Mitchell ordered, her voice immediately returning to humanitarian crisis mode. "Shields stabilized, several sections still in forced vacuum. Estimated serious injuries, 470. They need immediate medical evacuation. Prepare triage bays. Transmit to the platforms that we are sending rescue teams. Coordinate with local authorities to identify priority injured." Lyra watched, astonished, as the same humans who had just executed an annihilation campaign immediately switched to humanitarian rescue mode. Medical teams materialized in the transports, carrying equipment that, she realized, was compatible with multiple alien physiologies. They prepared for this, she understood, with sudden clarity. Not just for combat, but for the consequences, to save lives. The humans hadn't just come to fight, they had come to protect. In the following hours, Lyra accompanied the rescue operations, witnessing something that challenged her previous understanding of human nature. Human doctors worked alongside colony technicians, improvising solutions for biochemical incompatibilities that Coalition medical manuals would classify as intractable without specialized equipment. When supplies of a specific type of synthetic blood fluid ran out for an amphibious species, she saw a human chemist, a young woman with dark circles of exhaustion, but steady hands, literally synthesize it from scratch using portable lab equipment and improvised spectrographic analysis. "We're good at improvising," the chemist explained, when Lyra expressed admiration mixed with disbelief. "On Earth, we call it making do. Making it work with what you have, not what you wish you had. When you come from a planet where resources were always limited, you learn to be creative or fail." She smiled tiredly as she injected the synthesized fluid into an amphibious survivor, who immediately began breathing easier. "Besides, we're not going to let someone die just because we don't have the perfect instruction manual." A colony survivor, a crystalline being from Deneb, very similar to Councillor Vexcora, approached Lyra as he was being carried for treatment. His facets were cracked, leaking a luminescent substance that was the crystalline equivalent of blood. "Mediator," he said through his translator. his voice weak but charged with emotion. "We transmitted a distress call to the Coalition 4 hours ago. The response was that the Council needed to assess the situation before authorizing intervention. These humans," he paused, his facets glowing with something that looked like tears. "They just came. No questions, no bureaucracy. They just came." Lyrathine had no answer for that. Mitchell met her in the boarding bay, overseeing the transfer of seriously injured to the Prometheus's most advanced medical facilities. "Your council is transmitting," the commander informed her, her tone neutral. "They want explanations about unauthorized military action in Coalition territory. Apparently, there is a formal motion to declare us aggressors and demand immediate withdrawal from controlled space." Lyrathine felt genuine anger for the first time in decades. "They are threatening you? After you saved 2,400 lives that the Council would have let die while debating protocols?" "Politics," Mitchell said with a shrug. "I don't blame them. We violated their rules, and rules exist for reasons. But some rules need to be broken when lives are at stake." "What will you tell them?" Mitchell smiled, and there was something wild in that expression. "I will say that we deeply regret acting without proper authorization, that we recognize the importance of Coalition protocols, and that the next time we receive a distress call, we will do exactly the same thing, regardless of bureaucratic approval." "That may have consequences," Lyrathine warned. "I'm counting on it, mediator, because if the consequence is the Council realizing they need to change their priorities, then it was worth every second of formal reprimand we'll receive." That night, while the Prometheus orbited Kepler 186f coordinating reconstruction efforts, Lyrathine transmitted her own report to the Council. Not the sanitized report that diplomacy expected, but the raw truth. Members of the Council, she spoke directly into the quantum transmission camera. "I witnessed today something that our coalition lost at some point in our long history. I saw a young species, technologically inferior, risk their own lives to protect strangers. With no expectation of profit, no formal obligation, without even being formally asked." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Humans are violent. They are aggressive. They possess a terrifying capacity for destruction. But they also possess something we forgot how to value: the courage to act when action is necessary, even if it means breaking rules, even if it means personal sacrifice. I recommend immediate integration as full members, not because they are perfect, but because they are exactly what the Coalition needs to survive in the real universe, not the idealized universe we built in our diplomatic chambers." The Council's response would take days to arrive, but Lyrathine already knew what she had personally decided. Humans had reached the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the Kepler 186f incident, the galaxy had divided into two clear factions regarding humans. There were those who saw them as necessary saviors, and those who feared them as a new threat to the established order. Lyrathine found that she did not fit comfortably into either group. The Eternal Citadel had become a cauldron of heated debates. The Council met daily to discuss the human question, while reports from across the galaxy arrived describing radical changes in the behavior of predatory species. Raiders who previously attacked with impunity now hesitated. The mere mention that humans might be monitoring a sector was enough to disperse entire pirate fleets. But it wasn't just criminals who had changed their behavior. 3 frontier colonies had formally requested human protection instead of relying on the coalition's slow response protocols. 2 member species had initiated military exchange programs with Earth, wanting to learn real combat tactics and strategies. The word combat itself had become controversial, something the coalition had avoided for millennia. Lyrathine was in her meditation chamber when the alarm sounded, but it was not the tone for a council meeting call or a diplomatic emergency. It was something she hadn't heard in almost a century. Existential threat alarm. She rushed to the command center, her robes billowing behind her. The Grand Hall was already crowded, with representatives materialized through quantum projection, all talking at once in poorly controlled panic. Vexicora raised his crystalline facets in a gesture for silence. The room obeyed. Members of the coalition, his voice reverberated with a gravity that only millennia of existence could confer. We have received confirmation. The swarm has returned. A deathly silence fell over the assembly. Lyrathine felt her blood freeze, ancestral memories of horror passed down through generations echoing in her mind. The swarm. The only threat the coalition had never managed to defeat, only postponed through painful sacrifices. It was not a civilization in the traditional sense. It was a biomechanical collective mind, a grotesque fusion of technology and biology that consumed entire systems. Planets were stripped of resources, entire populations assimilated into its growing mass, and the worst, the swarm learned. Every civilization it faced, every technology it encountered, was absorbed and perfected. The last incursion had been 230 years ago. The coalition had lost 17 worlds and 13 billion lives before managing to force a temporary retreat through an electromagnetic pulse barrier that took decades to build. "Where?" asked the delegation from Andromeda Proxima, their amphibious voice trembling. "Omicron 7 Sector, Southern Galactic Rim," Vexcora replied. "4 systems have already been consumed. Expansion rate, 1 system every 16 days. Projections indicate it will reach Central Coalition territories in less than a year." A gaseous representative materialized in the center of the room. "Let's activate the barrier protocols. We can build another electromagnetic pulse line." "The swarm has adapted," Vexcora said darkly, his facets losing luminosity as if hope itself was fading. "Long-range sensor data analysis indicates complete resistance to the electromagnetic frequencies we used previously. Our only proven defensive tactic is now useless. Worse, it appears to have evolved new assimilation methods that are 37% more efficient than before." Real panic began to spread through the assembly. Civilizations that had existed for millennia, that had considered their survival guaranteed by the coalition's structure, now suddenly faced the real and imminent possibility of extinction. Some delegations began discussing the evacuation of entire worlds. Others proposed strategic retreats that basically meant abandoning entire sectors of the galaxy. Lyrathine felt an overwhelming weight of despair. She had dedicated her life to diplomacy, to the belief that problems could be solved through dialogue and cooperation. But how do you negotiate with something that wants nothing but to consume? How do you reason with a collective mind that saw other life forms only as resources to be assimilated? That was when the human transmission arrived, cutting through the chaos like a sharp blade through fog. Commander Mitchell appeared on the central hologram, her image projected from the Prometheus, which was on patrol at the galactic rim. But she was not alone. With her were two other humans Lyra Thine did not recognize, both wearing different uniforms. One had the insignia of a civilian scientist, the other of a high-ranking military officer. Coalition Council, Mitchell began, without preamble. We intercepted your transmissions about the swarm threat. We analyzed the available data and have a proposal. The humans have no authority to participate in this discussion, protested a conservative member from Sigma Draconis. This is a threat to the Coalition, not the solar system. Mitchell ignored the objection completely. Dr. Chen, she gestured to an Asian man with graying hair. Present the analysis. The human scientist activated his own holograms, showing detailed models of the swarm's structure. What you call a biomechanical collective mind is essentially a distributed neural network organism with self-replicating nanotechnological components. Its capacity for adaptation comes from an accelerated evolutionary learning system. He paused, letting the data sink in. But every network has weak points, and self-replication systems have inherent vulnerabilities if you know how to exploit them. Are you suggesting you found a weakness? Vexcora asked, a note of impossible hope in his voice. We are saying we know how to kill this thing, the third human, a woman in a different military uniform, declared. Her insignia identified her as a general. But it will cost. Lyra Thine approached the hologram. Explain. The general continued. The swarm's regeneration depends on a positive feedback loop. The more it consumes, the stronger it gets. But if we introduce a disruptive agent into the system's core, we can turn that feedback loop into a cascade of failures. Dr. Chen resumed. We developed a nanotechnological virus specifically designed to exploit the swarm's self-replication architecture. Once introduced into the central system, it will replicate using the same mechanisms the swarm uses, but with a crucial modification. What modification? Lyra Thine asked. Each subsequent generation of the virus will be exponentially more unstable. The swarm will try to adapt, but the very process of adaptation will accelerate the instability. It's like cancer for a collective mind, turning its greatest strength into its greatest weakness. Mitchell returned to focus. But there's a problem. Someone needs to deliver this virus to the swarm's core, and the core is protected by millions of defensive units and located at the center of the main mass. It's a suicide mission, Vexcora said slowly, understanding the implication. Yes, Mitchell agreed without hesitation. The ship making the delivery will not return. The chances of penetrating the defenses, deploying the virus, and escaping are statistically zero. Absolute silence filled the great hall. And yet, Mitchell continued, her voice gaining a tone of iron determination, we have 423 volunteers, a full crew for a fourth vessel we are designating Icarus. Every single one of them knows exactly what this mission means, and every single one of them chose to go anyway. Lyra Thine felt something break inside her. 423 beings willing to die for a galaxy that barely knew them, for civilizations that were still debating whether they should even be accepted as members. Why? She asked, her voice cracking. Why would they sacrifice themselves like this? Mitchell looked directly at her through the transmission, and Lyra Thine saw in the commander's eyes the same. things she had seen on Kepler 186f. It wasn't glory or a quest for honor. It was something simpler, something deeper. Because it's the right thing to do, Mitchell said simply. Because we have the capacity to save billions of lives, and to refuse would be to betray everything that makes us human. We don't just fight when it's convenient, mediator. We fight when it's necessary. The third human, who identified herself as Captain Elena Volkov, designated commander of the Icarus, spoke. My crew are not heroes seeking legends, Council. They are just people who understand that some things are worth more than individual survival. Civilization, hope, the future. These things have to mean something, or why did we bother reaching for the stars? The debate that followed was intense. Some council members argued that accepting human sacrifice was morally unacceptable. Others insisted the proposal was too risky, based on untested science. Still others viewed the humans as primitives trying to prove themselves through reckless gestures. But as they debated, reports kept coming in. 2 more systems consumed. The swarm's expansion rate was accelerating. It was Vexicora who finally ended the debate. 11,000 years ago, he said, his voice reverberating through the hall, we founded this coalition on the principle that intelligent life is sacred, that cooperation overcomes conflict, that civilization means preserving, not destroying. He paused, his facets gleaming with crystalline emotion. These humans, whom we barely know, are offering their own principles, that some things are worth dying for, that sacrifice for strangers is not madness, but the most civilized act possible. Perhaps, he said slowly, we have forgotten that true peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the willingness to stand between the darkness and the light, knowing it might cost everything. The vote was unanimous. The Icarus mission was authorized, and 423 humans began preparing for what would undoubtedly be the last journey of their lives. Lyrathane watched through the sensors as the Icarus was constructed in record time in Earth's orbital shipyards. It wasn't an elegant vessel like those of the Coalition. It was functional, brutal in its simplicity, designed for a single purpose. When Captain Volkov and her crew boarded, there were no grand ceremonies, just silent goodbyes and unwavering determination. The galaxy watched and waited, and the humans once again prepared to redefine what it meant to be civilized. The Icarus departed the solar system on an Earth morning, though the concept of morning was irrelevant in the interstellar vacuum. Lyrathane had insisted on being present at the Eternal Citadel to observe through the long-range sensors, a silent vigil that was joined by billions across the galaxy. The ship was smaller than its warship counterparts, only 800 meters long, but every square inch was dedicated to 3 things: propulsion, shielding, and the special cargo bay housing the nanotechnological virus that would be the galaxy's salvation or its epitaph. Captain Elena Volkov transmitted one final message before initiating the final jump sequence. To all who are watching, her voice was calm, almost serene. Do not consider us heroes. Heroes are those who survive to tell the tale. We are just people who found something worth dying for. And if our death means trillions of others can live, then we will die grateful. She paused, and for the first time, a touch of emotion entered her voice. To our friends and families on Earth, remember us not with sadness, but with pride. We reached for the stars to make a difference. And we did. To the Coalition, who gave us a purpose greater than ourselves, thank you. And to the Swarm, her voice hardened, get ready. Humanity has arrived, and we are not backing down. The transmission ended. The Icarus accelerated, its jump drives glowing with almost painful intensity, and vanished into the distorted fabric of space-time. The journey to the Swarm's core would take 3 weeks in subjective time. During that period, the Coalition evacuated all systems within a 50-light-year radius of the projected trajectory. If the plan failed, they wanted to minimize casualties. Lyrathine did not sleep during those 3 weeks. She remained in the command center, monitoring every fragmented transmission that managed to cut through the massive interference caused by the Swarm's presence. The first 2 weeks were relatively quiet. The Icarus checked in regularly, reporting normal progression through uncontrolled space. But when they entered the Swarm's detectable perimeter, everything changed. Hostile contact. The voice of the Icarus sensor officer crackled through the distorted transmission. 3 million defensive units detected. Interception formation initiating. 3 million. The number was absurd, but Coalition sensors confirmed it. The Swarm had learned since its last confrontation. It now protected its core with a defensive density that made penetration virtually impossible. Virtually, not absolutely. Initiating Phaeton Protocol, Volkov transmitted. All crews, battle stations, let's show this abomination why humans don't quit. The Icarus accelerated directly into the cloud of defenses. Lyrathine watched, barely breathing, as the human ship began executing maneuvers that defied tactical comprehension. They didn't try to avoid the defenses, they aimed directly for the densest points. Opening torpedoes launched, a crew member reported. Detonation in 5, 4, 3. The explosions created temporary breaches in the defensive formation. The Icarus plunged through them with perfect timing, its shields glowing under constant impact from biomechanical weapons. Shields at 70%. Another voice. 62, 59. They were losing protection rapidly, but they kept pushing forward. Section 3 compromised, came a calm report despite the gravity. Sealing compartments. 12 casualties confirmed. 12 lives extinguished in an instant. Lyrathine felt tears well up, a physiological response she hadn't experienced in decades. Keep advancing, Volkov ordered, her voice firm. They didn't die for us to give up now. The Icarus penetrated deeper. Every kilometer cost lives, every second bought with blood and sacrifice. Transmissions became more sporadic as communication systems failed under accumulated damage. Approaching the core, Volkov transmitted. The interference was so intense, her voice was barely recognizable. Distance, 20,000 kilometers. Shields critical. Propulsion compromised. But we are going to make it. Captain? Dr. Chen's voice emerged, rough with pain. Cargo bay intact. The virus is protected. When we reach the deployment point, it will work. How many of us are left? Volkov asked. A pause. 187, Captain, out of 423. More than half lost, but still fighting. Each loss was a name, a story, a family that would never see their loved one return. But they had known this when they volunteered. Lyrathine was not the only one watching with reverence and horror. Across the Coalition, entire civilizations stopped to witness that moment. Public squares on distant worlds displayed the transmissions on massive holograms. Schools suspended classes so that young people of peaceful species could see what sacrifice truly meant. Elders who had lived centuries in absolute peace now confronted the reality that this peace had a cost that others willingly paid. On an ocean world of Tau Ceti, aquatic beings who had never known war wept saline tears into their waters. On an orbital station near Vega, a crystalline child asked their parents why the humans didn't simply run away. The parents' answer, laden with emotion that crystals rarely showed, was simple. Because some fight, so others don't have to. 5,000 kilometers, Volkov announced, her voice coming through layers of interference like a distant echo. Prepare for manual deployment. Manual. That meant the automated systems had failed completely. It meant someone would have to physically carry the virus to the launch point, exposed to deadly radiation and the partial vacuum of compromised sections. Defensive resistance increasing, the sensor officer reported. They know where we're going. They are concentrating everything on stopping us. Then, we'll have to move faster than them, Volkov replied. Lyrathine could hear the wild grin in her voice. All remaining power to propulsion. Shields, divert everything to the engines. Captain, that leaves us completely exposed. I know. Do it anyway. The Icarus became a bullet of metal and determination, hurtling through defenses that tore its hull like paper. Internal explosions echoed through the fragmented transmissions. Muffled screams, then silence. 1,000 kilometers. A new voice, not Volkov's. Captain is wounded. Officer Chen, assuming temporary command. I'm functional. Volkov's voice returned, weak but stubborn. Position? 500 kilometers from the ideal deployment point. Sufficient. Prepare launch. The cargo bay opened into the vacuum. The nanotechnological virus, contained in a specially designed casing, was ejected with calculated precision directly toward the swarm's pulsating core. For 3 eternal seconds, nothing happened. Then the core began to glow with a light that was unnatural. It wasn't the characteristic bioluminescence of the swarm, but something else, something wrong at the fundamental frequency. Deployment confirmed, Chen transmitted, his voice heavy with triumphant exhaustion. The virus is active. Initial replication detected. It's working. The swarm noticed. The biomechanical mass began to convulse, trying to purge the invader from its system. But it was too late. The virus spread through the distributed neural connections, each generation multiplying the instability. Begin retreat, Volkov ordered weakly. Captain, Chen replied with a gentleness that contrasted with the surrounding chaos. There are not enough propulsion systems for retreat. We knew. This was always a one-way trip. Silence on the transmission. Then Volkov laughed, a surprisingly genuine sound. Then let's enjoy the show, folks. Front row seats to the death of a false god. Lyrathane watched through the sensors as the swarm began to collapse from the inside out. The cascade of failure the humans had predicted was accelerating exponentially. Defensive units simply stopped functioning. Biomechanical structures began to disintegrate, and in the center of it all, a small, broken human ship, with fewer than 200 souls still alive, watched its own death arrive. To those who survive, Volkov transmitted, one last time, tell the story, not of how we died, but of why we chose to come. Because when the darkness threatens to consume the light, Someone has to stand in the way. And if we are consumed in the process, at least we shone for a moment. It has been an honor, Chen added, for the Coalition, for Earth, for the future. It was worth it. The transmission cut out. 3 minutes later, the sensors detected the final explosion. The Icarus and its 187 survivors ceased to exist, consumed by the chain reaction they themselves had initiated. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The swarm convulsed for 7 hours, before finally collapsing completely. The collective mind that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia fragmented into millions of non-functional components, just floating biomass and dead metal. For the first time in recorded history, the swarm had been defeated, not contained, not delayed, destroyed, and it cost 423 human lives. Lyrathine fell to her knees in the Eternal Citadel, tears streaming freely while around her. Representatives of 42 species did the same in their own forms of mourning and reverence. They had witnessed something that would change the Coalition forever. They had seen what humans were willing to do when the survival of others was on the line, and they knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the galaxy now possessed guardians who would never retreat, never give up, never allow the darkness to win without a fight. The humans had proven their worth in blood, fire, and absolute sacrifice. 3 years after the sacrifice of the Icarus, the Eternal Citadel hosted an unprecedented ceremony in Coalition history. For the first time in 11,000 years, a new seat would be created on the Supreme Council. Not as a junior member or integrating civilization, but as a full member with complete authority. The seat would be offered to the humans. Lyrathine watched the preparations from the upper gallery, her emotions a complex whirlwind of hope and melancholy. In the 3 years since the swarm's destruction, the galaxy had changed in ways she could barely comprehend. The borders that were once zones of gradual abandonment now teemed with reconstruction activity. Colonies that had been evacuated were being repopulated. Trade routes, considered lost, were reopened. And in each of these locations, there was a common presence: human ships, patrolling, protecting, maintaining constant vigilance. The human fleet had grown to 18 warships, each named after mythological or historical figures representing resistance and sacrifice. Prometheus, Ares, Valkyrie, Spartacus, Boudica, and others patrolled the galactic confines with determination that never wavered. But it wasn't just a military presence. Human engineers helped rebuild damaged stations with their creative improvisation techniques. Human doctors established trauma clinics on frontier worlds, treating injuries that Coalition medicine had abandoned as too complex. Human teachers shared knowledge about psychological resilience with species that had never needed to develop such skills. Humans had become, in essence, the unofficial guardians of the galaxy. And today, they would be officially recognized. Vexicora materialized beside Lyrathine, his crystalline facets shining with contemplative emotion. "I am proud," he said simply. "You were right about them from the start, Prime Mediator." "I was afraid," Lyrathine admitted. "Afraid of what their violence might mean. But I learned that violence is not inherently evil. It is the tool. What matters is the hand that wields it and the purpose behind it." The ceremony began with traditional Coalition pomp, chants in ancient languages, holographic projections showing the history of the Galactic Union. elaborate speeches about unity and progress. Finally, the crucial moment arrived. The Grand Chancellor of the Coalition, an energetic being from the Orion Nebula who had served for 400 years, floated to the center of the Great Hall. For the first time in our long history, his voice reverberated like distant thunder. We offer not just association, but full partnership. To the humanity of Earth, we recognize your extraordinary contributions, your courage when we failed, your strength when we weakened, your sacrifice when we hesitated. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. It is our honor to offer you the supreme seat of Galactic Protectorate, with authority over all defense and security matters of the Coalition. A recognition that you have become our guardians, our defenders, the shield between civilization and chaos. The assembly waited. The transmission was being sent directly to Earth, where humanity had designated its representatives. The response came not from Earth, but from a ship orbiting the Citadel. Commander Sarah Mitchell, now Admiral of the Human Expeditionary Fleet, materialized through holographic projection. She was not in dress uniform. She wore her standard duty uniform, the same one she wore on patrol. A silent declaration. Grand Chancellor, members of the Council, Mitchell began, her voice carrying the same direct tone Lyra Thine remembered from 3 years ago. On behalf of humanity, we deeply appreciate this honor, but I must, respectfully, decline it. A shocked murmur ran through the assembly. Lyra Thine felt her heart sink. Were they rejecting the Coalition? Mitchell continued before panic could spread. We do not refuse because we do not value the partnership. We refuse because we believe we can serve better in a different role. She activated holograms showing maps of the galaxy. The Coalition governs well. Your laws are just, your diplomacy is wise, your administration is efficient. You have created a civilization that is genuinely admirable. But there are places where governance does not reach, where laws have no meaning, where diplomacy fails. The holograms focused on the galactic frontiers, the wild regions where civilized space ended and the unknown began. It is in those places that humans belong, Mitchell declared. Not in council rooms or diplomatic chambers, but on the borders, in the shadows. In the places where threats form before they reach protected worlds. A new holographic image appeared, showing a formal proposal. We request official designation as Coalition Frontier Guardians. We will not govern, we will not make laws, but we will patrol. We will protect, and when threats arise, we will face them before they reach you. She looked directly to where Lyra Thine was, as if she knew exactly where the mediator was watching. Let us be what we are good at being. The shield in the darkness, the unsheathed sword, the violence that protects the peaceful from having to become violent. The silence that followed was profound. Then Vexcora materialized in the center of the chamber. Admiral Mitchell, he said, his crystalline facets glowing with intense emotion. Your proposal is accepted. Not just accepted, but embraced. Because you have taught us something we had forgotten. He paused, letting his words echo. That true peace is not the absence of capacity for violence. It is the conscious choice not to use it, sustained by the certainty that if necessary, we can. You have given us back that certainty, and for that, the galaxy is eternally indebted. He extended his crystalline facets in a gesture of reverence that was rarely seen. For millennia, we believed that evolution meant transcending violence completely. that a truly advanced civilization would not need warriors or defenders. But the humans showed us that this was arrogance disguised as enlightenment. Other voices joined the Elder Counselor, representatives of worlds that had been saved by human intervention on Kepler 186f, families of swarm victims who now lived thanks to the sacrifice of the Icarus, entire species that had rediscovered hope, knowing that someone was willing to fight for them. The vote was unanimous. 42 civilizations, each with its own cultures and philosophies, agreed on something fundamental. Humans had earned their place not through conquest or coercion, but through voluntary sacrifice. They were officially designated Coalition Frontier Guardians, with full authority to act in defense of any member without the need for prior approval. It was a level of trust never before granted to any species, even the founders of the Coalition. After the ceremony, Lyrathine managed a private meeting with Mitchell aboard the Prometheus. "You always knew you would refuse," Lyrathine said, not as an accusation, but as an observation. Mitchell smiled. "We knew they would offer, and we knew we needed to refuse. Not because we don't want to be part of the Coalition, but because our role is different. Someone needs to be willing to do the dirty work so others don't have to." "It is a heavy burden," Lyrathine observed, sitting beside the Admiral. "It is," Mitchell agreed, without hesitation. "But it's our burden. And honestly, Mediator, we can't imagine doing anything else." She looked through the viewports at the stellar vastness, where billions of stars blinked in eternal silence. There are things out there you can't even imagine. Threats that are just waiting for the right moment. Predators that watch the Coalition like farmers watch livestock. And while the Coalition builds, creates, and flourishes in well-deserved peace, we will be in the shadows, ensuring those threats never reach you. And when you need rest, when the weight becomes too much, Lyrathine asked softly. She had learned in recent weeks that humans, despite their admirable strength, were more fragile than most Coalition species. Their lives were short, their bodies brittle. How could they sustain such vigilance for generations? Mitchell turned, and Lyrathine saw tears in the Admiral's eyes for the first time. Not tears of weakness, but of deep emotion and unwavering determination. Then we will remember the 423 of the Icarus, of every life lost protecting strangers, and we will find the strength to continue, because that's what humans do, Mediator. We carry the burdens so others don't have to. Years passed. The galactic frontier remained secure under tireless human watch. New threats emerged from the depths of unknown space, predators that had watched the Coalition as easy prey for generations, each one faced with the same relentless determination that the humans had demonstrated on Kepler 186f and against the Swarm. The Coalition flourished as never before in its long history, its culture reborn, its arts blossoming, its sciences advancing in genuine peace, provided by the silent guardians who voluntarily carried the burden of protection. Memorials were erected for the crew of the Icarus on 40 different worlds, each reflecting the local culture but united in respect. They were not grandiose monuments of stone and metal, but simple translucent plaques with 423 names engraved and a "Auzar" phrase that became the unofficial motto of the entire Coalition. They chose the light. And on the frontiers, where the darkness of unknown space met the light of civilization, black ships patrolled eternally. Prometheus, Ares, Valkyrie, and their sisters, each crewed by humans who had chosen the same path. Lyrathine visited the frontier regularly now, not as prime mediator, but as a friend. On one of these visits, she asked a young human officer why he had volunteered for frontier service. He smiled, pointing to the stars, because someone has to care. And if it's not us, who will it be? It was a simple answer, but it contained the entire essence of what made humans unique. Not grand philosophy, not elaborate theories about duty and honor, just the fundamental conviction that someone needed to care, and that someone could be them. That night, Lyrathane transmitted a personal log that would be preserved in the Coalition archives for all future generations. She wanted those who came after to understand what she had witnessed, what the humans had given the galaxy. Today, I witness the truth that took me years to accept, a truth that challenges millennia of Coalition philosophy. Humans are not the strongest, not when compared to crystalline giants from Deneb or energetic entities from distant nebulae. They are not the oldest, mere children in a galaxy populated by ancient civilizations. They are not the most technologically advanced, still learning secrets that other species mastered ages ago. She paused, organizing thoughts that had finally found clarity. But they are, without a shadow of a doubt, the most necessary, because they possess something that all our ancient civilizations lost at some point in our long journey toward peace. The visceral memory that peace has a price. That civilization is not a natural state of the universe, but something that must be defended, protected, fought for every single day. And more than the memory, they possess the willingness to pay that price, even knowing exactly how much it will cost. They are the violence that protects innocence, the nightmare that hunts nightmares, the shield that never breaks, and the sword that never rests. And while they watch the borders, the Coalition can dream. It can create. It can be everything we aspire to be. May future generations remember, the light of civilization shines brightest, not because the darkness has disappeared, but because someone chose to stand between them. And those someones are called humans. She ended the transmission, looking one last time at the stellar vastness where, somewhere in the shadows, between the stars, vigilant guardians kept eternal watch. And she knew with absolute certainty that the galaxy was in good hands. Human hands, calloused by sacrifice, strengthened by determination, guided by compassion that refused to give up even in the face of the impossible. Humanity had reached the stars, and the stars were brighter for it. End of story. If the tenacity of the human crew inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more Chronicles of the Galactic Frontier, where we explore stories of courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit of survival that defines humanity among the stars. The universe is vast and full of wonders and dangers, and in every story, we discover what it truly means to be human when confronted with the infinite. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any epic adventures across the far reaches of the galaxy.